Eviction notices are usually just paper, but for one desperate woman losing her childhood home uncovered a buried nightmare. Beneath the rotting floorboards sat a rusted iron safe, untouched for decades. When a seasoned locksmith finally cracked its dial, he didn't find gold. He fell backward, gasping in pure horror. Rain hammered relentlessly against the cracked window panes of 42 Sycamore Drive, mimicking the chaotic drumming inside Abigail Miller's chest. The house, a sprawling but decaying Victorian structure in the heart of a forgotten Pennsylvania steel town, had been in her family for 3 generations. Now it belonged to a faceless corporate trust, and she had exactly 24 hours to leave. Her grandfather, William, had passed away 6 months prior, leaving behind a mountain of hidden debts and a reverse mortgage that had quietly bled the estate dry. Abigail, working 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep the heat on, had fought bitterly in court. She had pleaded with the asset manager, a ruthlessly efficient man named Harrison Caldwell, but her efforts were in vain. Caldwell had stood in the courtroom, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, and delivered the final blow with chilling indifference. "The bank reclaims its property tomorrow at 5 p.m., Miss Miller. Have your belongings removed, or the sheriff will remove them for you." Abigail stood in the center of the dim living room, surrounded by a fortress of cardboard boxes. The house felt unnaturally cold, stripped of its rug's photographs, and the comforting scent of William's pipe tobacco. As she sealed another box of kitchenware, her mind drifted to her grandfather's final days. William had succumbed to severe dementia, his mind unspooling into aggressive paranoia. He had spent his last weeks barricaded in his armchair, clutching a heavy iron fireplace poker, staring obsessively at the basement door. He refused to let anyone downstairs, not even the nurses. "They can't have what's in the dark. Abby!" He would whisper, his eyes wide with a terror she had never understood. "Promise me you'll never let them open it." At the time, she had dismissed it as the tragic rambling of a dying man. But now, with the house slipping through her fingers and the walls closing in, those words echoed in her mind like a warning bell. Needing packing tape from the downstairs workbench, Abigail finally opened the door to the basement. The wooden stairs groaned in protest under her weight. The air down here was thick, smelling of damp earth mildew and something sharply metallic. She pulled the cord on the overhead bulb bathing the concrete room in a sickly yellow glow. The basement was mostly empty, save for an old wooden workbench bolted to the far wall. As Abigail reached for the tape, she noticed something strange. The heavy water-damaged tarp beneath the workbench was partially peeled back, revealing a deep, unnatural depression in the concrete floor. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable curiosity, Abigail gripped the edge of the tarp and yanked it backward. A cloud of thick grey dust bloomed into the air, causing her to cough violently. When the dust settled, she froze. Embedded directly into the foundation of the house, flush with the concrete, was a massive rusted steel door. It was a floor safe. Abigail dropped to her knees, brushing away decades of accumulated grime. The safe was a beast of industrial engineering, easily 3 feet wide, dominated by a heavily oxidized combination dial and a thick lever-style handle. The metal was pitted and scarred, bleeding streaks of orange rust. There were no brand names, no serial numbers, just an imposing slab of cold, unforgiving steel. Her heart hammered against her ribs. William had been a machinist at the local steel mill before it shuttered in the late 80s. He was a man of modest means, living paycheck to paycheck. Why would a man who clipped coupons and repaired his own shoes have a bank-grade vault buried in his basement? More importantly, what was inside it? A wild, desperate hope ignited in Abigail's chest. Could it be money? Gold bars. A hidden inheritance William had tucked away for emergencies. If there was cash in that safe, she could pay off Caldwell. She could hire a better lawyer. She could save her home. She gripped the rusted lever and pulled with all her might. It didn't budge a millimeter. She tried spinning the dial, but the internal mechanisms were completely seized by time and moisture. It felt as solid as a gravestone. Abigail glanced at her watch. It was 1:15 p.m. Caldwell and the local sheriff would be knocking on her front door in less than 28 hours. She didn't have time to rent heavy machinery, and she certainly didn't have the strength to pry it open herself. She needed a professional. Digging her phone out of her pocket, she frantically searched for local locksmiths. Most were closed, or explicitly stated they did not handle heavy-duty vault cracking. Finally, her eyes landed on a listing on the edge of town: Finch Security and Keys. 24/7 emergency services. She dialed the number. A gruff, gravelly voice answered on the third ring. "Finch!" the man barked. "Please—" Abigail said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need a floor safe opened. It's an emergency. I have to get it open today." "I don't do rush jobs on vaults, lady. Takes time. Takes money. Call someone else. I have my grandmother's wedding ring." Abigail blurted out, her pride evaporating. "It's 2 carats flawless cut. It's worth thousands. If you open this safe for me right now, it's yours." Silence hung on the line, punctuated only by the sound of static and the locksmith's heavy breathing. "Text me the address," Finch finally said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Gregory Finch was a man who looked like he had been carved out of weathered oak. At 62, he possessed a thick, salt-and-pepper beard, hands covered in faded scars, and a demeanor devoid of any patience for small talk. He arrived at 42 Sycamore Drive in a battered utility van, lugging 2 massive canvas tool bags that clanked heavily with every step. Abigail met him at the door, holding out the velvet box containing the diamond ring. Gregory barely glanced at it, snatching it with a grunt and shoving it into his chest pocket. "Show me the box," he demanded. She led him down the creaking stairs into the damp basement. When Gregory laid eyes on the exposed steel door in the concrete, his gruff exterior faltered for a fraction of a second. He dropped his bags and crouched beside the safe, running his calloused fingers over the rusted dial and the exceptionally thick, reinforced hinges. "This isn't a standard residential lockbox," Gregory muttered, his brow furrowing deep into his forehead. "This is a custom modification. Looks like a repurposed Mosler door from a commercial bank, circa 1930, but the locking bolts have been retrofitted." "Can you open it?" Abigail asked nervously, twisting the hem of her sweater. "I can open anything," Gregory replied flatly, "but I don't like this. Usually floor safes are designed to keep people out. The way these hinges are mounted, the reinforcement is entirely on the exterior." He looked up at her, his dark eyes narrowing. "This wasn't built to keep burglars out, kid. It was built to keep something in." Abigail swallowed hard, William's delirious warnings whispering in the back of her mind. "They can't have what's in the dark. Just open it," she insisted. "Please. I lose this house tomorrow afternoon." Gregory sighed, pulling a heavy-duty angle grinder, a bore scope, and a titanium-tipped drill from his bag. "Stand back. This is going to get loud." For the next 3 hours, the basement became a chaotic symphony of screaming metal and flying sparks. Gregory started by attempting to drill a tiny viewport near the dial, hoping to use his bore scope to manually align the seized tumblers. But the steel was laced with a hardened carbide plate, a security measure that shattered 3 of his best drill bits. By 4:30 p.m., the air in the basement was thick with acrid smoke and the smell of ozone. Gregory was drenched in sweat, cursing under his breath as he wrestled with the heavy machinery, Abigail paced the length of the room, her anxiety spiking every time her phone buzzed with an automated text from Harrison Caldwell's office, reminding her of the impending eviction. The internal locking bar is completely fused. Gregory panted, tossing his safety goggles aside and wiping his forehead with a grease-stained rag. Rust has eaten through the spring mechanism. We can't dial it open. I'm going to have to cut the hinges and use a hydraulic spreader to pop the door. Do it, Abigail said immediately. Gregory grabbed his angle grinder, outfitting it with a fresh diamond edge blade. The sparks flew in a brilliant, terrifying arc as he brought the blade down on the massive iron hinges. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched mechanical shriek that vibrated through Abigail's teeth. Slowly, agonizingly, the thick metal began to yield. After another hour of grueling labor, Gregory killed the grinder. He wedged a heavy claw-like hydraulic spreader into the glowing red-hot gap he had created between the door and the frame. "All right," Gregory grunted, pumping the lever on the spreader. "Stand clear. If the tension snaps, it'll take your head off." With every pump of the handle, the hydraulic tool groaned, exerting thousands of pounds of pressure. The heavy steel door protested with a sickening metallic screech. Abigail held her breath, her fingernails digging into her palms. Please let it be enough to start over. Please let it be money. Crack. A sound like a gunshot echoed through the basement. The locking bar finally snapped under the immense pressure. The heavy steel door popped upward about 2 inches, settling slightly askew on its ruined hinges. A sudden overwhelming stench rushed out from the dark gap. Abigail gagged, immediately slapping a hand over her mouth. It was a stagnant, suffocating odor like old copper-dried earth and something deeply, unnervingly rotten. It smelled like a tomb that had been sealed tight for half a century. Gregory coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. "Jesus," he muttered. "Must have been a water leak down there. Smells like a dead swamp." He grabbed a heavy pry bar, wedging it under the lip of the heavy door. "Help me lift it," he ordered. Abigail stepped forward, ignoring the putrid smell. Together they grabbed the iron handle and the pry bar, throwing their combined body weight backward. The heavy Mosler door groaned, shifted, and finally flipped over backward with a massive, echoing clang that shook the dust from the basement ceiling. The vault was open. "Let me get a light down there," Gregory said, clicking on a high-powered tactical flashlight. He leaned over the edge of the dark rectangular pit, shining the beam straight down into the shadows. Abigail took a step forward, her heart soaring with anticipation. "What is it? Are there lock boxes? Is it—" She didn't get to finish her sentence. The moment the harsh white beam of the flashlight illuminated the bottom of the safe, Gregory's entire body went rigid. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his weathered skin an ashen, sickly gray. He didn't speak. He didn't move. "Gregory," Abigail asked, stepping closer. Suddenly, a strangled, guttural gasp tore from the locksmith's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. His hands began to shake so violently that the flashlight slipped from his grip, tumbling down into the vault and shattering its lens against whatever lay at the bottom. Gregory stumbled backward, his heavy work boots tangling over his own tool bags. He hit the concrete floor hard, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the open pit. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide and unblinking, locked on the dark square in the floor. "No, no, no, no," Gregory stammered, his tough, fearless demeanor entirely broken. He looked up at Abigail, his face contorted in terror. "Get away from it," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Don't look. Get the hell away from it, and call the police, right now." Paralyzed by the locksmith's visceral reaction, Abigail felt the air leave her lungs. Gregory's frantic, scrambling, his pale face slick with cold sweat, and his desperate pleas to call the police sent a jolt of primal terror straight down her spine. The basement suddenly felt 10 degrees colder, the heavy metallic stench now suffocating in its intensity. Ignoring Gregory's warnings driven by a morbid, irresistible compulsion, Abigail crept toward the dark, rectangular pit in the concrete. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket, pulling out her smartphone and switching on the flashlight. She stepped up to the jagged edge of the retrofitted Mosler vault, holding her breath against the putrid odor, and shined her light into the abyss. It was not a pile of gold bars. It was not a stash of cash. Huddled at the bottom of the 3-foot-deep steel vault was a human skeleton. The remains were remarkably intact, clad in the rotting, moth-eaten tatters of a 3-piece wool suit that looked like it belonged to the Prohibition era. The skull rested at an unnatural angle against the rusted corner of the safe, its hollow eye sockets staring blindly upward. But the bones were not what made Abigail's stomach violently heave. Wrapped around the skeleton's wrists, binding them tightly together, were heavy industrial-grade iron chains, padlocked with thick brass master locks. The victim had not been placed in the safe after death. The scratch marks gouged into the inside of the heavy steel door, frantic, desperate, bloody grooves permanently etched into the metal, told a horrifying story of a man who had been locked inside, alive, buried beneath the foundation, to slowly suffocate in total darkness. Clutched against the ribcage of the remains was a large, heavily oxidized tin lockbox, practically fused to the yellowed bones by decades of dampness and decay. Abigail stumbled backward, dropping her phone. The device clattered against the concrete floor, its light casting wild, erratic shadows across the basement walls. She finally listened to Gregory. She turned and ran up the wooden stairs, her legs shaking so violently she barely made it to the kitchen counter, where she grabbed the landline and dialed 911. Within 15 minutes, the quiet, rain-soaked street of Sycamore Drive was transformed into a chaotic circus of flashing red and blue lights. Uniformed officers quickly taped off the property, while crime scene technicians in white Tyvek suits swarmed the basement. Gregory sat on the curb outside in the pouring rain, a shock blanket wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders, muttering quietly to an officer taking his statement. Abigail sat at her kitchen table, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee a sympathetic paramedic had handed her. She stared blankly at the wall, unable to process the nightmare unfolding inside her childhood home. Her grandfather, William, the gentleman who used to carve wooden birds for her on the porch, had lived directly above a tomb for over 50 years. A tall, broad-shouldered investigator walked into the kitchen. He introduced himself as Detective Ray Mitchell of the Allegheny County Cold Case Division, a man whose sharp, intelligent eyes missed absolutely nothing. Miss Miller. Mitchell began, gently pulling up a chair across from her. I know this is incredibly overwhelming, but I need to ask you a few questions about your grandfather. Did he ever mention any renovations to the basement? Any construction work done in the late 1960s or early 1970s? Abigail shook her head slowly. He was a machinist at the steel mill. He liked to tinker down there, but he never hired anyone for construction. Not that I know of. Toward the end, before he passed, he became violently paranoid about the basement. He kept saying, "They can't have what's in the dark." I thought it was just the dementia. Mitchell sighed, pulling a small plastic evidence bag from his jacket pocket. The tech team managed to pry open the tin box the victim was holding. We are still running forensic diagnostics on the remains, but the contents of that box just turned this entire town's history upside down. He placed the transparent bag on the table. Inside rested a brittle, leather-bound ledger, perfectly preserved from the moisture by the tin casing, along with a tarnished silver pocket watch and a remarkably pristine ID card. Abigail leaned forward, squinting at the card. It bore the logo of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, an organization legendary for its private security and investigative work. The name typed beneath the faded photograph read, Elias Caldwell. Caldwell. Abigail gasped, the blood draining from her face. Like Harrison Caldwell, the asset manager trying to evict me. His great-uncle Mitchell confirmed his expression grim. Elias Caldwell was a senior operative for the Pinkertons hired locally back in 1968. He was investigating a massive multi-million-dollar pension embezzlement scheme orchestrated by the executives at Mellon Financial and the local steel unions. Your grandfather William was the union treasurer at the time. Abigail's mind reeled. Are you saying my grandfather was a thief, a murderer? Actually, no, Mitchell corrected her, his tone shifting into one of quiet respect. We skimmed the ledger. Elias Caldwell didn't figure out the embezzlement on his own. He had a whistleblower, an inside man feeding him documents, bank routes, and names of the corrupt executives stealing from the workers. Mitchell tapped the plastic bag. The whistleblower was your grandfather. William was trying to take down the corrupt executives, but Elias Caldwell was a double agent. The ledger outlines how Elias took the evidence from William, fully intending to sell it back to the corrupt executives for a massive payout. Elias betrayed your grandfather. He was planning to hand William over to the mob enforcers hired by the steel barons. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in Abigail's mind. William had discovered the betrayal. A desperate struggle must have ensued. A machinist, with access to heavy tools and a repurposed bank vault, fighting for his life against a corrupt Pinkerton detective. William hadn't just killed Elias in self-defense. He had buried the man along with the very ledger that proved the entire conspiracy, ensuring the evidence would never fall into the wrong hands. The Caldwell Trust. Abigail whispered realization dawning on her. Harrison Caldwell's family inherited their massive wealth shortly after 1968. The money Elias secured through his blackmail, it built their empire. Precisely, Mitchell nodded. And Harrison Caldwell has spent the last 5 years aggressively buying up properties on Sycamore Drive. We always assumed it was for commercial redevelopment. But looking at this, I'm willing to bet he found an old family journal. He knew his great-uncle went missing on this street. He knew the ledger was still out there, somewhere containing the names of the executives who founded his family's wealth. He wasn't foreclosing on this house to flip it, Miss Miller. He was trying to get the safe, Abigail said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and awe. He wanted to destroy the evidence before anyone could find it. The rain finally stopped the following morning, leaving the town washed in a cold, slate-grey light. Friday arrived, and the 5 p.m. eviction deadline loomed like a dark storm cloud. But the atmosphere at 42 Sycamore Drive was no longer one of defeat. At exactly 4:45 p.m., a sleek black Mercedes sedan glided up to the curb. Harrison Caldwell stepped out, immaculate as always in his tailored charcoal suit, clutching a leather briefcase. 2 burly county sheriffs trailed slightly behind him, looking deeply uncomfortable with the assignment. Caldwell checked his luxury wristwatch, a smug, victorious smirk playing on his lips as he marched up the concrete walkway toward Abigail's front door. He didn't bother knocking. He simply tried the handle, finding it unlocked, and pushed his way inside. "Time is up, Miss Miller," Caldwell announced, his voice echoing through the empty, stripped-down hallway. "I trust you have your belongings packed. The bank is officially taking possession of the property. Please hand over the keys and vacate the premises immediately." Abigail walked out of the kitchen. She wasn't carrying a box. She wasn't crying. She stood tall, her arms crossed over her chest, staring down the ruthless asset manager with a newfound fiery resilience. "I won't be handing over any keys, Mr. Caldwell," Abigail said smoothly. "And I certainly won't be leaving my grandfather's house." Caldwell's smirk deepened into a sneer. He gestured to the deputies behind him. "I admire your tenacity, but the law doesn't care about your attachment to this rotting structure. Deputies, please escort Miss Miller from the property. If she resists, arrest her." The deputies didn't move. They exchanged nervous glances, shifting their weight uncomfortably, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. "They aren't going to arrest me, Harrison," Abigail said, stepping aside to reveal the open doorway to the living room. From the shadows of the parlor stepped Detective Ray Mitchell, accompanied by two stern-faced agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the bold yellow letters of the FBI. Caldwell stopped dead in his tracks. The smug confidence instantly evaporated from his face, replaced by a mask of sudden cold panic. His eyes darted from the federal agents to Abigail, then down the hallway toward the open basement door, where the faint hum of forensic ventilation equipment could be heard. "Mr. Harrison Caldwell." Detective Mitchell said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest. We have federal warrants to seize all assets, records, and accounts associated with the Caldwell Trust." "On what grounds?" Caldwell demanded, his voice pitching up desperately, trying to maintain his facade of untouchable wealth. "This is a simple foreclosure. You have no jurisdiction here. The grounds of multi-generational racketeering, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder," the lead FBI agent replied, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We recovered Elias Caldwell's ledger from the floor safe in the basement. It details exactly how your family's trust was founded, on embezzled union pensions, and how you recently falsified property records and reverse mortgages to illegally seize this specific house in an attempt to destroy federal evidence." Caldwell's mouth opened and closed silently, like a suffocating fish. He stared in absolute horror as the FBI agents moved forward, grabbing his arms and forcefully spinning him around. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the empty hallway was the most satisfying sound Abigail had ever heard. "Your grandfather was a hero, Miss Miller," Mitchell said softly, as they watched Caldwell being frog-marched out the front door and shoved unceremoniously into the back of a federal vehicle. "He lived with a terrible, heavy secret to protect this town. He trapped a monster in that basement to ensure the evidence survived." The aftermath of the discovery made national headlines. The Caldwell Trust was entirely dismantled by the federal government. Millions of dollars in stolen pension funds were slowly traced and returned to the surviving families of the steelworkers who had been robbed decades prior. Because the reverse mortgage on Abigail's home was proven to be entirely fraudulent, a targeted manipulation by Caldwell to access the basement, the debt was officially voided. The deed to 42 Sycamore Drive was restored fully and cleanly to Abigail's name. Furthermore, a civil asset forfeiture clause allowed a portion of the recovered Caldwell funds to be awarded to the estate of the whistleblower. A week later, Abigail received a certified government check for an amount that ensured she would never have to work a minimum wage job again. She used the money to fully restore the Victorian house. The peeling paint was scraped away, the rotting floorboards replaced, and the dark, damp basement was entirely gutted, filled with fresh concrete and sealed forever. Abigail also kept her promise. She drove out to Finch Security and Keys, finding Gregory exactly where she had left him, tinkering with a broken padlock. Without a word, she handed him the velvet box containing her grandmother's 2-carat diamond ring. Gregory tried to refuse it, claiming he had barely done the job, but Abigail wouldn't take no for an answer. The scarred, gruff locksmith had cracked open the darkest secret of the town, setting her free in the process. Sometimes the things we bury in the dark don't stay buried forever. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are precisely the ones that lead us to salvation. Did this chilling story of a hidden basement vault and a town's dark secret keep you on the edge of your seat? Real-life mysteries are often buried right beneath our feet, just waiting to be unearthed. If you enjoyed this thrilling descent into deception history and true suspense, please be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow mystery lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding, true stories every single week. See you soon.